Welcome back. I'm Gila Ross, author of Living Beautifully and host of the Birkot podcast, where we share short, relatable ideas to impact and upgrade your everyday life. Last week, we started talking about how our perspective makes a massive difference, right? Sometimes it's not just so much what we go through, but it's a lot of times it can be more about what our perspective on what we go through is. And we started looking at the 15 morning blessings, which kind of take us through the things that we sort of take for granted in our life, and we stop and we thank ourselves on. So in this blessing, we're thanking God for clothing. Does our clothing matter?
Yes.
Tell me more about that. Why does it matter?
Clothing matters. When you don't feel good in what you're wearing, that makes a big difference in your mental state.
Interesting.
How you feel.
To me, clothing are a means of self-expression because I use color and I like soft fabrics, and it's part of who I am.
Okay. Rachel, were you going to say something?
Oh, I was just gonna go back to Adam and Chava and how clearly clothing mattered or didn't matter at one point, and then after eating from the tree of knowledge, then.
So what happened at this tree? What happened at this
clothing
tree?
mattered then.
Yeah. So just to bring everyone up to date with what Rachel is telling us is she's talking about the story of Adam and Eve. So before, when Adam and Eve were created in the Garden of Eden, they were naked. And they were fine with it, as we're going to see later, right? And then what happens is God tells them, don't eat from the tree. And what did they do? They eat the fruit of the tree, which wasn't an apple, by the way. There's a debate in the Talmud between the 4 different fruits it may have been. Could have been a fig or a wheat or something like that, but it wasn't an apple. But they eat from it, and then the text tells us that they saw that they were naked and they were embarrassed about it. And then they reached for some leaves and to cover it up. The question is, why? What shifted? What changed then that beforehand they were fine with being naked, and then afterwards they were embarrassed about being naked?
They became self-conscious.
I'll give you another analogy, another question that kind of can help us, maybe will help us clarify as well. Does anyone have a problem with an animal being naked? No, right? What about a very young infant? What about a 3-year-old?
Yeah,
Let's get a little weird.
in public,
10-year-old?
totally.
Adult? Completely inappropriate, right? What is it? Why is it that with an animal, we're absolutely fine with them being naked? No one looks around and when Usher, the dog that was here, no one was like, oh my goodness, you brought a dog in naked. No one cares about that, yeah? A baby, that we don't think twice about it being naked, right? Yet, why is it? What happens? Why is it that that's fine and an adult is not fine? We know on some level that, no, that's not okay.
Because sexuality can be misused or misdirected.
But the question is, why is it not seen as a sexual thing when you see an animal naked? Or the animals aren't seeing that as a sexual thing between one another, but when humans are, it's sexualized.
But even let's say an 8-year-old versus a 2-year-old, right? We have such a different perspective on an 8-year-old versus a 2-year-old.
It's a good question. I don't know.
All right, thank you all for coming. I left you with that's the part that I like to leave at. It's a good question. Marla, were you going to say something?
It has something to do with us being holy, so we're above the animals. You can't expect a baby to behave, or a 2-year-old to behave. They don't have the ability yet to behave as like a normal person, or a mature person, I should say. But for anyone above a certain age, they have the consciousness to know that they're holy, and they need to keep themselves holy, and the clothing protects them that way.
Here's the thing. When you see an animal, right, we don't blink or think twice about the animal being naked. Why? Because the animal is a physical being. That's all it is. There's nothing much more to the animal than the physical being. And then, but the same thing with a small child. A small child is very much a physical being. As we grow and develop, we hopefully develop our spirituality, right? And we become more than just the physical. And then the physical becomes blinding. It becomes too much, and we need to cover it up so that the spirituality can be revealed. Like if you think about the situation, right? If you're on a beach, right? And it's, the appropriate attire for a beach is very little. How many deep, meaningful spiritual conversations are we having on that sort of situation? It's a very physical place. It's almost like instinctual that we recognize that we're more than just a physical being. And therefore we have to cover up to reveal that spirituality. Now, going back to Adam and Eve, what happened there was a shift, right? Because before the sin, they were spiritual beings in a physical body, right? And what happened is it shifted. And all of a sudden, the physical became so much more blinding. And it's kind of what Marla was telling us, that before that, they saw a vehicle to be able to do the will of God, to be able to do the spiritual things. But afterwards, it became this attractive, strong physical image. And they felt embarrassed of it, and therefore they had to cover it up. Any thoughts or any questions? Yes, now you can say. Yeah.
Well, I know my dog has a heart, because if I'm upset, she instinctually knows to come on. I mean, she's just like really kind and caring and that type of thing.
And yeah, and that's, I don't think that's a contradiction, because when I say spiritual, I mean like animals. The difference between animals and humans is we as human beings grapple with right and wrong, right?
Oh, okay.
An animal doesn't grapple with right and wrong. It's animals can, and again, I'm not an expert on animals either.
Why not?
Apparently, I'm very limited. Although I don't know if that's a bad thing, because then they say jack of all trades, master of none. Right. So I don't think it's. I think it's more instinctive with animals than it is as like they're choosing. Should I be kind to Jackie today, or should I not be kind to Jackie? Yeah. Whereas we make that choice, right? So that's that spirituality, and that's what kind of makes us godlike. Is that just like God chooses to create, we can choose to live up to our higher self. So that's one of the things that we are thanking God for in the morning, about having the ability to having clothes to put on. And I think we shifted a little bit from the original question was, does clothing matter? And we heard from Jessica, and I think from some others as well, that the type of clothing that we wear also does matter, right? There's a fascinating story that's told of a homeless person who was living on the streets, and for some reason he chose to dress up in a suit, and he describes how when he was wearing the suit, how he felt completely different than just wearing the homeless clothes. So the clothing that we wear kind of does make a difference in how we feel and how we then behave and act. And in this blessing, we're kind of we're bringing a highlight to the fact that we have clothing.
I mean, we just released the hostages, so it's huge.
Yeah, I think it's a blessing that we can kind of resonate with us with the scenes from Israel of the released hostages. Why do we say it in the morning though?
The concept of like when we're sleeping, it's like a 60th of death, and we're like not able to like consciously move our bodies at that time.
We don't have control of our body or our mind when we're sleeping, right? If you've ever had a dream, and we don't really control what we're thinking when we're sleeping. We don't really control how we're moving, and when we wake up, he releases us from the binds of sleep. So that's one of the things why we say it in the morning. And it's sometimes, besides for feeling physically bound, right? Sometimes we can feel emotionally bound. And it's a blessing where we can either thank God for releasing us from our emotional bands, or if someone's going through something emotional, which feels binding on them, they can actually pray for God to give them the strength to release them. There's a story that's told of a little boy who had a caterpillar, And he asked his mum if he could, raise a caterpillar, and his mum explains to him what happens. The caterpillar is going to go into a cocoon, and he watches the caterpillar go into a cocoon, and he watches it a little bit later, and his mum tells him, what's going to come is that there's a butterfly that's going to break through, and he's watching the cocoon every single day to see what's going on, and one day he sees like a little rip in it, and he's like, wow, this is so exciting. And he sees that the butterfly is kind of like struggling within it. So what does he do is he decides to
open it.
to tear it
Right.
open. So the butterfly comes out, but its wings are all undeveloped, and it can't fly. And the boy's so sad. Like, what happened? His mother explains to him, look, what happens is that yes, you're trying to be helpful, but you actually harm the butterfly, because what happens is that how does the butterfly develop is through fighting through the cocoon, and through fighting its way out, through the struggle, it's how it develops into a beautiful butterfly. And sometimes we're not that different from a butterfly, right? We struggle with the things that we go through, and yet sometimes those things that we struggle through are the things that build us.
Well, that's what I was telling you.
Yes.
today.
Yes.
Well, we'd be bored otherwise. I mean, if we didn't have something to do or focus on and, go above, otherwise, bored is maybe not the right word, but if you don't have those challenges. Yeah,
It's like the extent
exactly.
of your challenge can be the extent of your.
Yeah, and that's how you grow, and that's how I'm like, I figured when I'm done with my mistakes, I'm done. I'm ready to, I'm kind of fine.
At some point,
Not on all of my mistakes, but, otherwise you're gonna grow from.
Yeah.
I think it's very, very easy to say that when you're like, I don't know, it's easy to say that, and it's easy to see. And at some point, so you're just like, okay, I'm good. I'm good.
Yeah.
I have fought my way through. I'm good.
I'm a beautiful butterfly already.
Yeah.
And I think I want to hear what you have to say, but I just want to respond to what you're saying. That's what makes it challenging, right? Because the real challenges are the ones that I'm not saying the real challenges, because I don't mean to imply that the other ones are not real challenges, but I'm saying when you hit a challenge that you're like, but why, right? Like I've got my wings, I've done my challenges, I've got my humility, whatever it is that God wants to build from me, but why? These are challenges. That's the challenge. The challenge is like, if we knew what it was there to develop in us, yes, it's still a challenge, but it's an easier challenge. But those challenges, I'll tell you, I'll go off topic a bit and I'll tell you a story.
We all do, so why not?
Yeah, so there's a fascinating story in the Talmud about with King David. King David turned to God and said to God, he said, why did your name, because in the prayers, which we haven't yet done, in the Amidah, we say the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. And he says, King David says to Hashem, he says, why did they merit to have their name attached to your name and I didn't? Right now, we have to understand King David was someone who was incredibly humble and had an incredible relationship with God, right? Like he wrote the Psalms, which is a beautiful book of his relationship with God and his struggles and his challenges. So he wasn't asking from a place of pride, like, why is my name not up on the plaque, right, on the board, right? He was asking from, what did they do to merit it that I haven't done? So you know what God told him? God told him the reason why their name is attached to God, and your name is not, is because they were tested and you weren't.
Yeah.
So what does King David says? He says to God, okay, fine.
Test me.
Not so good.
He's tested and he fails. Now the Talmud talks about what was his failure? Ask for a test. That was a failure. Why is it a failure to ask for a test? Why? Because there's that tiny bit of pride in saying, when we moved to Colorado, we had to get our driver's license again. So we had to get the test, and we had to get now regularly, okay, I'm not a good example for this, but regularly you wouldn't take a driving test unless you know you've got a really good chance of passing, right? And now this is a driving test is not such a great analogy because you can retake the test again, right? But you take it because you're fairly confident that you're going to pass it. So when King David asked God, test me, there's a certain amount of confidence there that test me, I'm going to pass it. Now the whole thing of a test is that it pushes us to the point where we feel like we can't pass it, right? And maybe once we can go into like what's the point of a test like that. But that point that you're addressing, I think is what the core of what a challenge is those times where we feel like, but I can't. That's the test, right? And that's the test. And success is doing that step, right? I can't, but I'm going to. I can't, but I'm going to. Because that is the challenge and that is the test. Any thoughts, any questions
What
on
was the
that?
test?
With King David was with Bathsheba, the story of Bathsheba, and Bathsheba's husband, he sent Bathsheba's husband into war, and he died in war, and then he married Bathsheba, and there was a failure on some level there. And the question exactly is, it's a longer conversation, but the question exactly what exactly was his failure there? And they dissect what he did and everything, and they say the root of the failure was that asking for a test, because a test is something that pushes us outside of our limits. It's something that we don't know. We don't know. We may even feel like we can't. Right? And then, you know, that is the test. Okay. Any thoughts, any questions? Otherwise, we're going to move on to the next blessing. What are we thanking God for in this blessing?
Standing up straight,
Yep. Again, and why do we do it in the morning?
because we get out of bed and we stand up straight,
Yes.
hopefully, if we're not a hunchback or have terrible back problems.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So we get out of bed and we hopefully can stand up straight, and we thank God for the ability to be able to stand up straight. What's interesting is this is also the source for bowing in some of the blessings, right? Like some of the blessings later in the Amidah, we bow and then we straighten up, right? This is the source of bowing. Why do we bow?
To humble ourselves before God.
Honor, humble. Someone else is going to say something? Reverence, respect, okay. Humility. You're all kind of right?
Just kind of.
Almost, right? Bowing is a physical act of subjugating ourselves before God. And you know, a few of you mentioned the idea of humility. What's the difference between humility and low self-esteem?
You still maintain confidence. I feel like you still maintain like yourself. When you have low self-esteem, you have like a low value or like worth of yourself. Whereas the humility, you still know your worth. You just you're like aware of also that I feel like you're aware that Hashem is greater.
Okay.
I think that humility. The question is how is the way that I use it is how is humility different than pride, as opposed to low self-esteem? Because when you're humble, you understand what your strengths and your weaknesses are from an honest place, as opposed to with low self-esteem, you only understand your weaknesses and you don't see your strength. And when you're prideful, you only understand your strengths and you don't see your weaknesses.
That's a good point.
So Marla, were you going to say something?
Well, in the differences with self-esteem and pride, it has to do with your ego, that your ego has a big place, whereas humility, you've kind of minimized your ego.
Interesting. What would lead a person to being humble versus
To be humble?
Yeah. With God, right?
Knowing God's greatness.
Knowing God, yes, beautiful. So a low self-esteem, I think you put it beautifully, is sometimes it doesn't even necessarily have to be accurate. Sometimes it can be inaccurate, but a person just sees themselves as small. Humility is a person who recognizes that God created them, recognizes that God is great, and I am tiny in comparison to God. And yet, despite me being tiny in comparison to God, despite me being like almost non-existent in comparison to God, I am existent. And I'm here because God created me and because God gave me different strengths and weaknesses. And I have a responsibility to use those weaknesses and strengths in a way that benefits the world. In fact, we're told that a person is supposed to have two different phrases, right? That they keep front and center. It's kind of like almost like we're supposed to have two pockets, and in one pocket we're supposed to have a phrase which says, I am Anochi Ofa Ve'efa, I am dust and ashes, right? And on the other one, we're supposed to have a phrase that says, B'shvili nivra olam, the whole world is created for me, right? What do you mean? What do you mean we're supposed to have, like, they're completely different. Either I'm dust and ashes, or the whole world is created for me. Which one? But the idea is that we're supposed to have the balance of them. I think most of the time is we hold them in the wrong places, right? When someone asks us to do something, or when we're called upon in life through a challenge or through something else, we think, who am I? I'm dust and ashes. I can't do anything, right? I can't do it. And then when it comes to like driving along the road, then it's like B'shvili nivra olam, the whole world is created for me, right? That we're supposed to do the flip when it comes to dealing with when it comes to an opportunity and to step up to do the right thing. Then we're supposed to say the whole world is created for me, right? Maybe this is why I was created, to step up and do this thing. Whatever the thing is that we have to do, whether it's going through a challenge, whether it's an opportunity we have to take on the mitzvah, the opportunity to help other people, whatever it is, that's when we're supposed to be thinking to ourselves, the whole world was created for me. And maybe the whole world is relying on me to do this thing. And then when it comes to, how we relate to other people, not that we have to feel like we're dust and ashes, but we have to put ourselves in the right place. We have to have the humility to be able to care about other people as well. Any thoughts, any questions? Or do we have time to do one more? Yeah, let's do one more. And what are we thanking God for here, and why are we doing it like first thing in the morning? Imagine if there was just water, right? It wouldn't be we wouldn't have a place to live, right? There would be no ground. And you wake up in the morning, you put your feet on the ground, and we're supposed to recognize and appreciate that there's a ground for us to put our feet on it and to stand up on. And if you think about the natural disasters that have happened when water, if you think about it, right? Like, what keeps water and earth?
Gravity.
Sea level.
Gravity, sea level. I'm
God.
looking. God, I told you I come for the holiness.
Dams. What? Dams.
Oh, dams.
Because I'm looking. A very simple level. Boundaries, right? God sort of put boundaries in place, that this is where the water is, and this is where the earth is. And when the water breaks through the boundaries, then it creates havoc, right? If you think about hurricanes or tornadoes, or not tornadoes, tsunamis that happen, floods that happen, it's a disaster, right? So and the same thing in our life as well. Like, boundaries are very important, right? If you think about that, I was reading an article a little bit ago about some parents who are raising their kids without any boundaries at all. Anyone wants to babysit? No, the silence. No one wants to babysit those kids, right? Why? Because we recognize as adults, especially when we're looking at other people's boundaries or lack of boundaries, we recognize how important the boundaries are. And in fact, when God gave us the luchot, the tablets, it says on it that it was the commandments were engraved. And the Talmud then says, don't read the Hebrew word for engraved is chares, which also means freedom, right? Cherut means freedom. Why is it saying that? Why is it saying don't read it engraved, but read it as freedom? Because it's teaching us that we can look at these 10 commandments, we can look at the mitzvot in the Torah and think, oh my goodness, so many boundaries, so many things that we shouldn't do. But those boundaries are our key to freedom. Why? Because before I answer the question, why are those mitzvot the key to freedom? Why are those sort of boundaries the key to freedom?
Because they're good boundaries.
Okay.
They
Holy
give
boundaries.
you boundaries, regulations on how to live the most productive life that you can.
Yeah. Beautiful.
With boundaries, it just provides safety. So like, if you're within your bounds, you can really be very expressive and feel safe to be that.
And their structure. I mean, I think you have to structure. I forget it. I mean, I think that's key. I mean, you have to conduct yourself within that structural environment, you know.
I have a story.
Yes, please share.
have a client who
this goes back to coveting your neighbor's wife, right? She had an affair, she's in therapy for it, but you can just see like it's eating away at her whole entire life, you know, from relationship with her husband, relationship with her kids, relationship with self, you know, and it's one of the, she crossed a boundary.
And
Granted,
she's
she's a-
suffering. I love how you're pointing out that it's her, not just what it hurt the rest of you, but it hurt her. And I think also what Marla was saying as well is, you know, all the different things that we could be a slave to. And I think the underlying thing that ties all of those things together is our passions, right? Like we can be a slave to our passions, our desires, right? And what the boundaries of the Torah do is they give us that they restrict those, they put boundaries on our passions and our desires so that we can live up to our higher value, right? Like I bet if you would ask this client of yours, you know, do you want to hurt your family, right? Do you want to be faithful? She probably would say, yes, I do, right? Yes, I did want to. But because she didn't have the boundaries or whatever, she crossed the boundaries, she wasn't able to keep to it, right? So those boundaries are what keeps us free and helps us live up to our higher self. Yes.
This also goes back to what you said at the beginning in terms of like what separates us from animals.
The ability to live up to our higher, yes, and to choose higher.
Thank you so much for taking the time to listen. I'd love to hear your feedback, and if you enjoyed this episode, you'll love my book, Living Beautifully: How to Bring Meaning, Joy, and Love into Your Life, based on the timeless wisdom of Birkot HaShachar. And please take a moment to rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss out. Have a wonderful day.